We're going to start off this evening with Wallace Sheep. And I've had the pleasure of hearing this young man a couple of times myself. He has an incredible range. He's lived quite a bit, I'd say pretty much all across the country, and brings that knowledge and experiences with him. And we're going to just hear what he's got to say tonight. Thank you very much, Wallace Sheep.
I just need to give one more emergency direction. If you keep your eye on Jim, I bet he'll be the first one out the door. Just follow him. He'll open the door right on out. If you can make it out safely, no problem at all. Tonight, I would like to take you back to my home. I grew up in Aiken, South Carolina, and I want to tell you stories about growing up with my dad. It's one of those experiences. Some of you may remember I told the story about the big game, the Carolina Clemson game last season in here, and it became clear that when Dad said go left, I go right. That's just the way it is. I'm the rebel in the family. I don't mind admitting it. It's true. Now, I tell stories on my family members, and I usually don't ask permission because they get mad at me anyway. But my dad, because as my brother said, he's the son of a Depression-era dirt farmer of German descent, and all of the stereotypes apply. He expects unquestionable loyalty. I, from the time I was a toddler, dreamed of the day I would turn 18 years old because I didn't want to have to follow his directions anymore. And I didn't after I was 18. But when I was older, in my 40s and 50s, I started thinking about telling Dad stories. And for a change, I decided I needed to go and get permission. So I went to see Dad in Aiken. He was 64 years old at that time. And I said, Dad, I want to tell some dad stories. And you're getting to the age that I need to do some reflecting and those kind of things if I'm going to tell them. And he said, son, you have been telling stories since you was a small child, and the truth of the matter is I've already heard that most of what you have to say is true anyway. Besides, my perception of what is true and yours is different, and you know that in the Sheely family, I am always right. Now, I was in my 40s at that point, and he still expected unquestioning obedience. There was no question about it all. My mom had passed on, and when Dad got ready to remarry, one day he suddenly invited us to the wedding and said if you came early in the week, that we could have dinner with the new wife and sit down. And Gary and I looked at each other and talked on the telephone and said, you know, you could at least give us 2 weeks notice so we could get an airline ticket at a cheaper price. But we came anyway. His wife just about got up and left the dinner table because she had never, I mean, it had been 3 men in the household for a number of years. And she said she got up to leave the table because she watched us slice each other to pieces. Remember those carving knives that they used to advertise for cutting your turkey so thin the relatives would never come back? Well, that's how we did each other with the barbs. We could slice the slices. I'm sure it was painful. And the pieces fell right back on top of each other. You wouldn't tell you were cutting one. That was the evening dinner. When I went to work, I ended up being moved. I started in Dallas, Texas. And I called Dad up on the telephone one day and said, they want to move me from Dallas to Sunnyvale, California. I've already got a driver's license. Do I tell him yes or no? I like to get his advice taken. He didn't always follow it. But I asked him for the advice. He said, son, 1,500 or 3,000 miles away from home, I'm not going to see you very often. You have to catch an airplane to come anywhere. So I moved to Sunnyvale, California. As I said, my mom was gone. And the first Christmas I wanted to come back, I was going to be there for the holidays. I was brand new at my job. Now, it was a pretty good job, but shelling out for that airline ticket was expensive. And I called Dad and said, I can't really afford the airline ticket. I don't think I'm coming. He said, come on, I've already got the chicken bog cooking. Chicken bog over noodles was the one dish we had that day at the house before the wedding. Chicken bog over noodles. After the wedding, they handed me not the wedding invitations, the wedding announcements to mail to all of their friends. And a year later, the friends were still mad at him and mad at the pastor because they hadn't told him they were getting married in advance. So I said, Dad, you know, it's such a complicated thing to come home for Christmas. You and Corinne go to Christmas Eve to church, and I won't. I tell you what, son, I'll pay for the ticket. You come on home. It was an unusually magnanimous gesture. I appreciated it truly. And I got the airline ticket and I flew home in time to be there for Christmas Eve services at church. Dad picked up the poinsettia we always put in the church. He looked at me and he said, son, take this out to your mother. And I thought, I don't have a car and I can't make it to the cemetery very easy. He meant his new wife, who I call Dad's wife. And I was an adult by that time, I'm living in the house, and she already had sons of her own. The next day, we got up in the morning, and you know, when I was a kid, you were used to having like thousands of presents underneath the Christmas tree. I used to like to sneak in and go back wrapping paper on the edge to see if I could figure out what it was. There weren't any presents underneath the tree. Up on the tree was a white business envelope with my name on it. And I think my brother had a couple of things underneath the tree. And they opened all the presents, and Dad said, well, aren't you going to take yours? And I said, yeah, Dad. And I opened the envelope, and inside the envelope was the bill of the airline ticket with a note marked on it to say I could take $50 off and I could pay him when I was able for the airline. The way my dad saw the world. I was bound and determined the next time I came home, I wasn't going to ask for anything. Now, that German part I need to tell you about. When I was leave the house, my dad would walk out in the car and he'd stand by the window and would ask if you needed anything. He didn't have any intention of giving you anything. He just was making sure you were all right. I had a letter from my mother that was all about, I don't know how she knew she was going to have a heart attack, but she'd written this letter and it was all about how to live with that. And she kind of laid the facts out. She was a very loyal spouse, no matter how hard he was to live with. She said, you just have to learn to do this to yourself. So the next trip I drove. Now, when you drive from one end of the country to the other end of the country, it takes an entire day just to get through Texas, much less home. So they were red roof inns and cheap places to stay, and I would drive until I couldn't stand up, and I would get a broom and I would drive on. And I got home, and Dad said when he met me, "Oh, I want to help you with your trip." I said, "Dad, we'll talk about that later. But none of worry about it." He said, "Well, you know, you're going to be here a whole week this time. I've laid out the chores." I said, "Dad, I'm on vacation." He said, "Well, the shrubbery has to be trimmed, and you know, the leaves have really have collected up. And you know, with you and your brother not here anymore, the work's not getting done around the house. And you know, I fell off the ladder the last time I was up on it, so I think you need to." There wasn't enough to keep me busy the entire week and then some. And I said, "Dad, that's not my plans." And we were sitting down at the dinner table when he was discussing the plans. And he said to me one of Dad's favorite lines: "As long as you put your feet underneath my table, you will do as I say." I got up from the dinner table, got in my rent-a-car, and drove to the finest restaurant in Aiken, South Carolina, and had a really long, nice evening, and came back home and said, "Dad, I'm doing well enough. I don't have to put my feet underneath your table anymore." And we had a pretty sour week after that. I had a pretty good time. I enjoyed myself. And Dad came out to the car as I was leaving. Said, "Oh, I meant to help you with this trip. I've written you a check." That was like be real money. He handed me the check and said goodbye. I looked at the check. $10, 2 gallons of gas. That's about all we covered. Look at my dad. I love him to death. Now, we all thought that my brother would close the estates for all of our family members because he was the youngest son, and so he was the executor of everything. And he went first. And so I got to look after my dad at his old age. And I need to tell you about my college graduation and how it turned 40 years later. When I graduated from high school, I said I turned 18 and I got out and got a full-time job working for the university. I didn't come home in the summer times. But Dad and Corinne said they were coming to my graduation. So I looked for them. It wasn't that big a coliseum. I did not see them. I didn't look. Corinne said when I got to the restaurant and they were already sitting down eating, actually they were almost finished restaurant that we were supposed to eat at. She said, "Well, we didn't think we needed to stay after you got your diploma, and we thought you'd sneak out." Well, the president said, "Those of you down on the floor, you're gonna sit right there." And I was an obedient young man, and I sat right there. Dad, on the other hand, told the honest, living truth. He said, "Dad, Wallace, we did not make it to your graduation. I'm sorry, I had more chores to do today than I had planned for, and it took longer." He said, "Dad, what did you do today?" He said, "Well, I stayed home because I needed to change the locks on the door." I said, "Dad, why did you need to change locks on the door on my graduation day?" He said, "Because you know what you call somebody who comes home from graduation? A visitor."
Oh.
He said, "And you need to understand that there's the 72-hour rule." Sometimes we refer to it in South Carolina as the pineapple rule. It's very common on the coast, and we have visitors who put a pineapple on the panel, and when the pineapple begins to stink, it's time for the visitors to go home. Well, that's the way I have for all of my life. They got one who couldn't take care of himself. That was the rule. They show up for a major event, they show up in time for dinner, and they'd be gone 2 days later. Whatever the event was, they were in and gone. One night he called me and said, "I'm at the gas station." I said, "The gas station's 3 blocks from the house." He said, "I can't find my way to your house." He said, "This is the last time we're coming." Well, we've been there about once every 7 years, so I figured, that would be too good. I went there instead of the other way from that point on. But Dad was just that way. I loved him to death in that way. And the amazing thing was, when I got to start taking care of him, the first thing I did was I drove him around town in Aiken, South Carolina, to find out if the two of them could find an assisted living apartment that they could live in. And I said, "Dad, you don't need to worry. They will take good care of you. And I've already asked. They change the locks on the door after everyone moves out so that you'll be safe and secure and won't have to worry about my getting in." He ended up back this direction, and I ended up spending a lot of time with him. And as I said, my brother went first, so it was absolutely amazing to get to look after my dad in the end. But Dad, you often told me that I didn't listen. Well, he said, "You don't ask me for advice." And I said, "Well, Dad, yes, I ask you for advice all the time because I want to know what you're thinking so I can go the opposite direction." That was really the plan. He said, "You're 50 years old and you haven't figured out the rules yet. As a son, you are supposed to be unquestioningly obedient to your father, no matter the age." I made that deathbed promise to my dad that I wouldn't tell Dad stories as long as he lived. I made that promise when he was 64, years old. There had never been a Shealy man that lived to 65 until my father. He lived to 90 years old. I finally get to tell my dad the story now because first week in April, I've got this little blue card with the numbers on it. I'm going to be that 65 years old, but he lived past. So anyway, thank you for letting me share my story.